Arachi landed in Beijing this morning. Iran's foreign minister walked into a meeting with Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, and sat down for the first face-to-face conversation between these two countries since this war began on February 28th. Not a phone call, not a readout through a third party. A physical meeting in Beijing, on Chinese soil, with cameras present for the opening remarks and closed doors for everything that actually mattered. The timing is not incidental. It is the entire point. Trump arrives in Beijing in 8 days, on May 14th, for his summit with President Xi Jinping. That summit was delayed for more than a month because of this war. It is the most consequential diplomatic meeting on Trump's calendar right now. Trade framework, technology restrictions, competition for influence across the entire region. All of it converges in that room on May 14th. And before Trump could get there, before a single American official could sit across from Xi and present America's position on Iran, Arachi flew to Beijing and sat in that room first. Iran got to China before America did. That sentence is the story of today, and almost nobody covering this is treating it as the structural event it actually is. Here is what we know happened in that meeting, and more importantly, here is what the gaps between the two official statements tell you about what was said when the cameras were off. Wang Yi opened on camera with language that was precise in a way that the coverage keeps glossing over. He said a comprehensive ceasefire is urgently needed, that a resumption of hostilities is inadvisable, and that continuing to negotiate is particularly important. 3 clauses: reasonable, measured, exactly what you would expect China to say publicly. But read what China's foreign ministry published afterward in its official statement. China called for a prompt resumption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Then read what Iran's foreign ministry published on Telegram about the same meeting. The Hormuz language was absent, not modified, not softened, gone entirely. 2 statements about the same meeting on the same day, and the point that China said publicly was the one point Iran chose not to confirm. That gap is not an editing oversight. When 2 governments publish readouts of a shared meeting, and one point appears in one statement but not the other, the missing point is the point where they disagree. China told the world it pressed Iran on Hormuz. Iran told the world it heard China speak, thanked China for its partnership, and described the bilateral cooperation as growing stronger under current circumstances. Iran did not confirm it will reopen the strait. Iran confirmed it will keep building its relationship with Beijing. Now hold that gap in mind while I give you the second piece of information that dropped today. Axios reported this morning, confirmed by Pakistani sources to Reuters and by CNN separately, that the United States and Iran are moving toward a 1-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding to formally end the war. The document, as described, would declare an end to hostilities, trigger a 30-day negotiation period on the bigger unresolved issues, begin gradually lifting both blockades on the Strait of Hormuz, and involve Iran committing to a moratorium on uranium enrichment. One source told CNN the moratorium being discussed is longer than 10 years. A previous American proposal had been 20 years. One source told Axios that Iran might also agree to transfer its enriched uranium stockpile out of the country, potentially to the United States itself. Pakistan said, and these are the exact words of the Pakistani source, "We will close this very soon. We are getting close." Oil fell 11% on this news. Markets priced in a resolution. And then an Iranian official called the proposal more of a wish list than a reality. And Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency confirmed that as of this afternoon, Iran had not yet sent its response to the Pakistani mediators. So here is where we are at the end of this day. America says a deal is close. Pakistan says we will close very soon. Oil fell 11%. And Iran flew to Beijing, declined to confirm the Hormuz language in the joint readout, called the proposal a wish list, and has not responded through the official channel. I want to explain why those things are not contradictions. I want to explain why they are actually the same move, and why understanding that move is the only way to understand what the next 8 days look like. Start with what Arachi actually came to Beijing to accomplish. The Al Jazeera correspondent reporting from Beijing said Iran had 3 specific objectives walking into this meeting. First, to brief China on Iran's current position in the negotiations. Second, to reaffirm ties with Beijing before Trump's arrival. Third, to secure continued economic and diplomatic support going forward. Read that third objective carefully. Securing continued economic and diplomatic support going forward is not a request you make when you are about to sign a deal that resolves everything. It is a request you make when you are about to enter a final negotiating window, and you want to know your structural support system stays intact regardless of the outcome. Iran went to Beijing today to make sure China does not give anything away to Trump on May 14th that reduces Iran's leverage before the final terms are locked. Here is what that means for the 14-point memo specifically. The memo, as reported, is missing two things that America has demanded throughout this entire conflict. There are no curbs on Iran's missile program in the current text. There is no requirement for Iran to end its support for regional proxy groups. Those two demands, which Washington has insisted on publicly for months, have disappeared from the document, being called the closest the two sides have ever come to an agreement. Read that disappearance alongside the fact that Iran arrived in Beijing today to brief China before responding through Pakistan. The items that fell out of the memo are the items the IRGC has declared non-negotiable since the first week of this war. The missiles are not in the text. The proxies are not in the text. Iran's foreign minister is in Beijing the same morning this text becomes public, and Iran's official response is that it is a wish list, while Iran has not formally responded through Pakistan. This is Iran testing what the document looks like when you say it out loud, watching what China says about it, and deciding whether to negotiate against the version that is missing the IRGC's red lines, or to demand a different version that confirms those lines are off the table, permanently, before Iran responds at all. Wang Yi's willingness to publicly call for Hormuz's reopening, while simultaneously affirming Iran's right to safeguard its sovereignty and security, including on the nuclear question, is China threading a needle for a very specific audience. China is telling Washington it pressed Tehran. China is telling Tehran it recognizes Iran's rights. Both messages go out simultaneously through official channels. Neither message commits China to a position that would cost it anything with the other side. And Iran watched how China threaded that needle before deciding what to say about the memo. There is a dimension to this that the coverage is underweighting entirely. The reason today's Beijing visit is structurally important goes beyond the immediate negotiation. In 8 days, Trump sits across from Xi in that same city. The Trump administration's calculation for that summit is built around tariff frameworks, trade concessions, technology agreements, and a broader bilateral reset after years of friction. A confrontation with China over Iran risks derailing that entire agenda. Trump himself said as much when he shrugged on CNBC last month, described a ship carrying Chinese cargo headed for Iran as a gift, and said that is the way war goes. Iran understands that constraint. Iran went to Beijing today specifically because Beijing is the room where America's leverage is weakest. Trump cannot pressure Xi on Iran without putting the May 14th summit at risk. And Arachi arriving in Beijing 1 week before Trump does means that when Xi sits across from Trump, Xi will have already heard Iran's full private briefing on where Tehran's real flexibility lies, what Iran is actually willing to accept versus what Iran is saying publicly to Pakistan, and what China needs to do or not do on May 14th to ensure Iran's structural support stays in place through the final negotiating window. America does not get that briefing. America gets what Iran says through Pakistani mediators, which is the formal channel, the public layer of the negotiation. China gets what Iran says in a face-to-face meeting in Beijing with the cameras off. Those are not the same conversation. Secretary of State Rubio said something yesterday that is worth examining carefully in this light. He told reporters, and I want to give you the exact framing, I hope the Chinese tell Arachi what he needs to be told, and that what you are doing in the Strait is causing you to be globally isolated. You are the bad guy in this. That statement from Rubio is America publicly acknowledging that China has leverage over Iran's decision-making that America does not have. Rubio is not asking China to pass along a message. Rubio is hoping China will use its relationship with Iran to push Iran toward a position that serves American interests. That hope is the gap between what America wants China to do and what China has any incentive to actually do. China's incentive on May 14th is to present itself to Trump as a responsible actor that helped bring about a ceasefire and contributed to regional stability, while extracting trade and technology concessions from Washington on the broader bilateral agenda. China does not need Iran to fully capitulate on Hormuz to achieve that. China needs the war to stop escalating and the oil to start flowing, because China is the world's largest importer of crude, and its own economy has absorbed real inflationary pressure from the Strait's closure. China's interest is a functioning Hormuz, not an American-controlled Hormuz. Those are different things. Wang Yi said as much publicly today. He supports freedom of navigation. He also supports Iran's sovereignty and security. The formula that satisfies both is a Hormuz that functions commercially, but operates under some framework that lets Iran claim it has not surrendered sovereign management of the waterway. That is not America's stated position. America wants unconditional free navigation. That gap between China's acceptable outcome and America's stated demand is exactly the space Iran is navigating from Beijing today. Watch 3 things as the next 48 hours run. The first is whether Iran formally responds to the 14-point memo through Pakistan before Trump leaves for Beijing. The Axios report says America expects a response within 48 hours. If that response comes and it is substantive, the negotiation is real and moving. If that response does not come, or comes as a counterproposal that reinserts conditions around missiles and proxies that the current text leaves out, Iran has used the Beijing visit to recalibrate what it is willing to say publicly before making any private concession. The second is whether Wang Yi or any senior Chinese official makes a second statement in the next 2 days that specifically addresses the 14-point memo, endorses its framework, or presses Iran publicly to respond through the Pakistani channel. If China speaks specifically about this document and pushes Iran to accept the framework, China has decided that moving the negotiation forward serves Beijing's interests better than maintaining ambiguity before May 14th. If China's next statement remains at the level of general ceasefire support and broad calls for dialogue, China has decided that ambiguity is more valuable than any specific push on the memo. The third is what language Trump uses about China's role in the Iran negotiation between now and May 14th. Today he said the war can end, that it depends on Iran agreeing to what has been agreed to. He acknowledged it is perhaps a big assumption. He told PBS that the deal would require Iran to ship its enriched uranium to the United States and pledge not to operate its underground facilities. That is a harder position publicly than what the memo reportedly contains. The distance between Trump's public statements and the memo's actual terms is the space where a deal gets made or falls apart. Watch whether Trump narrows that distance or widens it as the Beijing summit approaches. Because here is the fundamental tension underneath all of today's news. America needs a deal before May 14th to walk into Beijing from a position of strength rather than desperation. Iran needs to know what China will and will not trade away on May 14th before agreeing to any deal at all. China needs both sides close enough to an agreement that Beijing can take credit for the final push, without having to make any concrete commitment that costs China something real. All 3 of those needs are operating simultaneously, and only one country today was in a room with the country that holds the key to all 3. Iran flew to Beijing. Iran briefed China. Iran went home without confirming the Hormuz language. And in 8 days, Trump arrives in the same city trying to close a deal whose terms were already being shaped in a room he was not invited into.